The flames licked greedily at the edges of Katherine James's journal, curling the pages into black ash that carried her words away on the summer breeze. She stood frozen in the town square of Jackson, Wyoming, in the summer of 1883, watching as the last of her poetry collection, 2 years of her heart poured onto paper, was reduced to nothing by men who deemed her expressions improper for a lady of standing. "Let this be a lesson," Mayor Perkins announced to the gathered crowd, his jowls quivering with self-righteousness. "This kind of inflammatory female sentiment has no place in Jackson." Miss James would do well to remember her position. Katherine's cheeks burned hotter than the fire consuming her work. At 23, she had believed Jackson progressive enough to accept a woman's thoughts on paper. The daughter of the town's late schoolteacher, she had been raised on literature and encouraged to express herself until her father's death 6 months ago left her vulnerable to the town's shifting attitudes toward a single woman with opinions. "They can burn the pages," she whispered to herself as the crowd dispersed, some casting sympathetic glances, others smirking with satisfaction. "But they cannot burn what's in my mind." Mighty brave words for someone watching their life's work turn to cinders. Katherine startled at the deep voice behind her. Turning, she found herself looking up at a tall man with tanned skin and eyes the color of Wyoming summer skies. His dark hair fell in waves beneath a wide-brimmed hat, and dust from the trail clung to his clothes. She recognized him vaguely, the newest hand at the Silver Creek Ranch outside of town. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced, Mr. Keller." "Kieran Keller." He tipped his hat. "I've been working for Old Man Abernathy these past 2 months. Katherine's spine straightened. "Well, Mr. Keller, I don't see how my bravery or lack thereof is any of your concern." Instead of being offended, his mouth quirked into a smile that creased the corners of his eyes. "It becomes my concern when I ride into town and see perfectly good words being wasted. Especially when I heard talk of how beautiful those words were." Katherine blinked in surprise. "You've heard of my poetry?" "The ranch cook, Miss Gladys. She's got one of your pieces. Keeps it folded in her Bible. Says it reminds her that beauty exists even in hard places." He gestured to the smoldering ashes. "Mind telling me what was so dangerous about your words that they needed burning?" Katherine felt a flash of the anger and humiliation that had been building inside her. "I wrote about women's suffrage, Mr. Keller. About the rights of wives to their children and property. About the beauty of the mountains and how they make me feel free in a way society does not permit." She lifted her chin. "And occasionally, I wrote about love, the kind they don't discuss in polite company." Kieran Keller studied her for a long moment. "Sounds to me like you wrote truth, Miss James." "Truth is rarely popular, Mr. Keller." "No, but it's necessary." He glanced at the dispersing crowd, then back at her. "You got any more of those words stored away somewhere safe?" Katherine hesitated. "I have my thoughts. They can't burn those." "Good." He nodded decisively. "Because I've got a proposition for you, Miss James." "A proposition?" Her eyebrows rose skeptically. "I can't offer to publish your work or change these narrow minds overnight." He gestured around the town square. "But I can offer you a different kind of canvas." "What exactly are you suggesting, Mr. Keller?" "Write our story instead." "Our story?" Katherine echoed, confused. "I hardly know you." A slow smile spread across his face. "Not yet, but I reckon we could give these folks something worth reading about. Something they can't burn because it'll be living and breathing right in front of them." "You want me to?" "What?" "Chronicle an acquaintance with a ranch hand. I want you to write a love story they can't ignore," he said simply. "Your words. Our lives. Starting today." Katherine stared at him, wondering if the shock of losing her poetry had affected her hearing. "Mr. Keller, that's improper?" His eyes twinkled with challenge. "Inappropriate? Inflammatory? Good. Let's show them what real impropriety looks like." "Why would you suggest such a thing?" she asked, genuinely bewildered. "Because I've been watching you, Katherine James. Not in a manner that should alarm you," he added quickly at her expression. "But I've seen you in town, head held high despite the whispers. I've read the poems Miss Gladys shared, and I think this town needs your words more than they know." Katherine shook her head. "And what do you get from this arrangement?" For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his features. "The company of a fascinating woman. And perhaps—" he paused. "Perhaps a chance to be part of something meaningful. My life hasn't had much of that." Katherine felt something shift inside her, a spark of interest, of possibility, where moments ago there had been only despair. I should warn you, Mr. Keller. I'm not one to create fiction where none exists. I wouldn't ask you to. Just write what happens between us, honestly. Whether it's friendship or something more, let the story unfold as it will. But let it be told in your words. Katherine looked from the ashes of her work to the man standing before her, offering a different path. And if nothing worthy of writing occurs, then you'll have lost nothing more than you already have today. He extended his hand. What do you say, Miss James? Ready to write a new chapter? Katherine hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. I have one condition. Name it. I write exactly what I see and feel. No softening the edges to make it palatable. Kieran's smile broadened. I wouldn't have it any other way. And so, with the ashes of her poetry still warm in the town square of Jackson, Wyoming, Katherine James began the most unexpected story of her life. The following morning, Katherine sat at her small writing desk in the cottage she'd inherited from her father. The house felt emptier since his passing, the bookshelves still lined with his beloved classics, but the animated discussions they once shared now only echoes in her memory. She dipped her pen in ink and stared at the blank page before her. Was she truly going to document whatever transpired between herself and a man she barely knew? The idea still seemed preposterous in the light of day. A knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. She wasn't expecting visitors, and after yesterday's public humiliation, she'd hoped for a few days' reprieve from town gossip. When she opened the door, Kieran Keller stood on her porch, hat in hand, looking freshly shaven and considerably cleaner than he had in the town square. Good morning, Miss James, he said, his voice as warm as the June sunshine. I hope I'm not calling too early. Mr. Keller. She couldn't hide her surprise. I wasn't expecting you. Every good story needs a beginning, he replied with a smile. I thought perhaps we might give you something to work with. Katherine glanced down at his hands and noticed he was holding something, a small leather-bound notebook. What's this? A replacement of sorts. He held it out to her. It's not as fine as what you lost, I'm sure, but it's good leather that'll withstand wear. Katherine accepted the notebook, running her fingers over the smooth surface. The gesture was unexpectedly touching. Thank you. This is very thoughtful. May I come in? Or would that be too improper for our opening chapter? Katherine hesitated, weighing propriety against her own curiosity. I suppose a brief visit won't cause too much scandal, provided we leave the door open. She stepped aside to let him enter, noticing how he had to duck slightly beneath the doorframe. Inside, Kieran's presence seemed to make the small cottage shrink further. He looked around with unabashed interest, his gaze lingering on the bookshelves. You've got quite a collection here. My father was the schoolteacher. Books were his passion. Kieran nodded, moving closer to examine the titles. And yours? Words, she answered simply. In all their forms. He selected a volume and opened it carefully. Whitman. I am large, I contain multitudes. A man who understood that life doesn't fit neatly into the boxes others make for us. Katherine couldn't hide her surprise. You're familiar with Whitman? A flicker of amusement crossed his face. Did you think cowboys only read cattle brands and wanted posters, Miss James? She felt heat rise to her cheeks. I made no assumptions about your reading habits, Mr. Keller. I simply wasn't expecting a quote from Song of Myself on a Tuesday morning from a man I barely know. Then you're already gathering material for your story, unexpected revelations from mysterious characters. He replaced the book and turned to face her. I grew up with a mother who taught school before she married. She made sure her sons knew there was more to life than horses and cattle. Sons? You have brothers? Two. Both older, both working our family's ranch in Colorado. His expression softened with what might have been homesickness. I'm the restless one. Katherine found herself genuinely intrigued. What brought you to Jackson? The usual things that move a man. Adventure. Opportunity. He paused. Distance from expectations. Before she could inquire further, he changed the subject. I didn't just come to deliver the notebook. I have an invitation as well. An invitation? There's a spot about 4 miles north of town, a meadow high enough to see clear across the valley. The wildflowers are at their peak right now. His eyes met hers directly. I thought perhaps you might like to see it. For your writing. Katherine's practical side immediately raised objections. You're suggesting we ride out unchaperoned? After yesterday's display, my reputation can hardly afford another blow. Bring Mrs. Peterson if you're concerned about appearances. I know she's been looking after you since your father passed. Katherine was surprised he knew this. Martha Peterson was her elderly neighbor who had appointed herself Katherine's unofficial guardian since Thomas James's death. I doubt Mrs. Peterson would be keen on a 4-mile ride. Then we ride where people can see us heading out, take the main trail, and be back before supper time. He smiled. I promise to behave like a perfect gentleman, Miss James. I'm offering inspiration, not impropriety. Katherine considered his offer. The thought of escaping town boundaries, even temporarily, held powerful appeal after yesterday's humiliation. And there was something about Kieran Keller, a directness, an honesty that made her inclined to trust him despite their brief acquaintance. Very well, Mr. Keller. I accept your invitation, but I'll need an hour to prepare. His face brightened. I'll secure you a gentle mount from the livery and return at 10. After he departed, Katherine sat at her desk again, opened the new leather notebook, and began to write. June 6, 1883. Yesterday, they burned my poetry in the town square for being improper. Today, a cowboy named Kieran Keller brought me a new notebook and invited me to see wildflowers. Perhaps this is how all great tales begin, with ashes and an unexpected hand offering something new to write upon. True to his word, Kieran returned with 2 horses, a docile-looking chestnut mare for Katherine and a larger bay gelding for himself. Katherine had changed into her riding skirt, a practical garment her father had encouraged despite some townspeople's disapproving glances. As they rode north out of town, Katherine was acutely aware of the curious stares they attracted. She recognized Mrs. Thornton and her daughter pausing their shopping to watch, and Sheriff Mills tracking their progress from the jailhouse steps. We're causing quite a stir, Katherine observed once they'd passed the last buildings. Good, Kieran replied. Let them wonder. It'll give them something to talk about besides your inflammatory poetry. The trail gradually climbed into the foothills, winding through stands of aspen and pine. Kieran proved to be an attentive riding companion, pointing out landmarks and keeping their pace comfortable. Katherine found herself relaxing as Jackson disappeared behind them. How long have you been writing poetry? Kieran asked as they followed a stream upward. Since I was 12. My father encouraged it, said I had a way with capturing moments. She smiled at the memory. After my mother died, it became my way of making sense of things. I'm sorry about your mother. And your father. Losing both parents must have been difficult. It was. Katherine hadn't spoken much about her grief to anyone in town. My mother's passing was long ago enough that the sharpness has faded. But my father. She swallowed. 6 months isn't long enough to adjust to that kind of silence. Kieran nodded. Some silences never get filled. You just learn to live alongside them. The simple understanding in his words touched something in Katherine. You speak from experience. My father died 3 years ago. Heart gave out during a cattle drive. He kept his eyes on the trail ahead. You don't replace people. You just make room for their absence. They rode in companionable silence after that, the sounds of birds and running water filling the space between them. Finally, the trail opened onto the meadow Kieran had described. Katherine drew a breath of wonder. The valley spread below them in a tapestry of green and gold, while the meadow itself was alive with wildflowers, blue lupins, orange paintbrush, yellow balsam root, and dozens of varieties she couldn't name. The Grand Tetons rose in the distance, their peaks still holding snow despite the June warmth. It's magnificent, she said softly. Kieran dismounted and came to help her down. His hands were strong and steady at her waist, lifting her effortlessly. When her feet touched the ground, he didn't immediately step away, and for a moment, they stood closer than propriety would dictate. Worth the ride? He asked, his voice lower than before. Katherine nodded, suddenly aware of the quickening of her pulse. Absolutely. He led the horses to a small grove of trees where they could graze while tethered, then spread a simple blanket on a patch of grass surrounded by flowers. From his saddlebag, he produced a modest picnic: bread, cheese, dried apple slices, and a canteen of water. I thought you might be hungry after the ride, he explained, gesturing for her to sit. They ate together, talking easily about books they'd read, places they'd seen. Katherine learned that Kieran had worked ranches across 3 territories, that he could recite Tennyson as easily as track a stray calf, and that he had left Colorado after a disagreement with his oldest brother about the future of their family ranch. He wanted to expand, take on debt, modernize everything, Kieran explained. I thought we should stay within our means, preserve what our father built. In the end, I decided it was easier to leave than fight a battle I couldn't win. Do you regret it? Katherine asked. Kieran considered this, looking out over the valley. I miss my family, but I don't regret choosing my own path. He turned to her. What about you? Any regrets about your poetry, now that you've seen the consequences? Katherine plucked a wild flower, twirling it between her fingers. I regret losing the work. But I don't regret writing it. Those words were true when they left my pen. They're still true now, even as ashes. Kieran's eyes held hers. I admire that about you, Katherine James. Your unwillingness to compromise your truth, even when it costs you. The use of her first name, though technically improper between new acquaintances, felt right in this meadow far from town scrutiny. And I admire your willingness to be seen with the town pariah, Kieran Keller. He smiled. Perhaps I have a fondness for lost causes and brave women. After their meal, they walked through the meadow, Kieran pointing out different wildflower species. Katherine found herself committing every detail to memory, the way sunlight filtered through the brim of his hat, casting shadows across his features, the gentleness with which he handled delicate blooms, the deep resonance of his laugh when she told him about her childhood adventures. You should write about this place, he suggested as they stood at the meadow's edge, gazing across the valley. I will, she promised, though I doubt anyone in Jackson would want to read it. Write it anyway, he said. Some words need to exist whether they're read or not. As the afternoon waned, they reluctantly mounted their horses for the return journey. The ride back was quieter, both of them seemingly lost in thought. When the outskirts of Jackson came into view, Katherine felt a pang of disappointment. Thank you for today, she said as they approached her cottage. It was exactly what I needed. Kieran helped her dismount, his hands lingering briefly at her waist. Did you find what you were looking for? For your story? Katherine looked up at him, seeing the genuine interest in his eyes. I think I may have found the beginning. Good. He stepped back, maintaining a proper distance as houses came into view. Because I'm quite interested to see where this story leads. That evening, Katherine wrote well into the night, filling pages of the new leather notebook with descriptions of the meadow, the flowers, and the man who had shown them to her. She wrote honestly about her curiosity, her caution, and the unexpected ease she felt in his company. I do not know if this is the beginning of a love story or merely a friendship born of unusual circumstances, she concluded. But for the first time since they burned my poetry, I feel words flowing freely again. And that, in itself, may be worth the risk of whatever comes next. Over the next 3 weeks, Katherine and Kieran's story began to take shape through a series of increasingly frequent meetings. What started as proper visits on her porch, with Mrs. Peterson pointedly gardening within view, evolved into longer excursions riding along the river, delivering supplies to outlying homesteads, attending Sunday services together. The town noticed. Whispers followed them, some curious, others suspicious. Mayor Perkins made his disapproval clear with tight-lipped greetings and pointed comments about maintaining standards. But Katherine found herself caring less about these opinions with each passing day, as her notebook filled with observations and conversations that mattered far more than town gossip. She learned that Kieran had a talent for sketching simple but expressive drawings that captured the essence of landscapes and animals. He showed her his small collection one afternoon as they sat by the Snake River, his leather portfolio containing scenes from his travels across the West. These are remarkable, Katherine said, carefully examining a drawing of a herd of wild horses. You have a genuine gift. Just a hobby, he demurred. Something to pass the time during long watches. Art is never just anything, she countered. These drawings tell stories as clearly as words on a page. He looked pleased by her assessment. Speaking of words on a page, how is our story progressing? Katherine had been selective about what she shared from her growing manuscript, reading him certain passages while keeping others private. It's becoming more complex than I anticipated. How so? She hesitated, unsure how to articulate the changing nature of her feelings. When we began, I thought I was documenting a simple friendship. An act of defiance against those who tried to silence me. And now, his eyes held her steadily. Now I find myself writing about things I hadn't expected. How the light catches in your hair when you remove your hat. The way your voice changes when you speak of home. The curious feeling I get when you're about to arrive and when you've just departed. Kieran's expression softened. Are these improper observations, Miss James? Perhaps. She smiled slightly. But I promised to write truth, however inconvenient. He moved closer, their shoulders nearly touching as they sat on the riverbank. I find myself thinking of you at odd moments, he admitted quietly. When I'm mending fences or riding the north pasture. Even in my dreams sometimes. The confession sent warmth spreading through Katherine's chest. That sounds dangerously like material for those improper poems they burned. Good. His hand found hers between them, fingers intertwining with gentle pressure. Let's give them something worth burning. They sat together as the sun began its descent, hands joined, talking softly about dreams and disappointments, the paths that had led them to this riverbank in Wyoming territory. When they finally rose to leave, something fundamental had shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings growing beyond the boundaries of their original agreement. That night, Katherine wrote with a new intensity, trying to capture the precise moment when admiration had begun transforming into something deeper. Today, I realized that what began as an act of rebellion has become the most honest thing in my life. I am falling in love with Kieran Keller, not because it will scandalize the town or validate my right to express myself, but simply because his soul speaks to mine in a language I've always understood but never heard spoken aloud until now. As July ripened into August, their relationship deepened despite, or perhaps because of the obstacles they faced. Abernathy, Kieran's employer, had begun making comments about hands who get distracted by town women, increasing Kieran's workload to limit his free time. Katherine received a letter from the Ladies' Auxiliary rescinding her membership due to behavior unbecoming a respectable unmarried woman. These challenges only strengthened their resolve. When they couldn't meet openly, they exchanged notes, Katherine's poetic reflections answered by Kieran's thoughtful responses, often accompanied by small sketches of what he'd seen that day. They created a private language of shared references and inside jokes, building a world between them that existed beyond Jackson's judgment. On a warm August evening, they met at the edge of town, where Katherine waited with a picnic basket and Kieran arrived with his horse already saddled. I have something to show you, he said, helping her mount behind him. Something I found last week while tracking strays. They rode for nearly an hour, following game trails into a secluded valley Katherine had never seen before. As they crested a small rise, she gasped at the sight below, a hidden hot spring nestled among rocks, steam rising gently in the cooling evening air. It's beautiful, she murmured as they dismounted. And private, Kieran added. I haven't seen any sign that anyone else knows about this place. They spread their blanket near the spring, far enough away to be comfortable in the summer heat, but close enough to appreciate its otherworldly beauty. As they ate their simple meal, Katherine noticed Kieran seemed unusually quiet. Is everything all right? She asked finally. You seem distracted. He met her eyes, a seriousness in his expression she hadn't seen before. I received a letter yesterday. From my brother in Colorado. Is everything well with your family? Yes and no. He set down his plate. My oldest brother has fallen ill, nothing life-threatening, but serious enough that he can't manage the ranch alone. My middle brother has asked me to return home to help until he recovers. Katherine felt her heart sink. I see. When would you need to leave? That's just it. He took her hand. I haven't decided if I'm going. Kieran, they're your family. Yes, but my life is here now. His eyes held hers intently. With you. The declaration hung between them, both exhilarating and frightening in its implications. We've known each other barely 2 months, Katherine said softly. That's hardly enough time to know that I love you. He finished for her. Because I do, Katherine. I think I have since that day in the town square when you stood watching your words burn and still refused to be silenced. Katherine's breath caught. They had been circling these words for weeks, approaching them in poetry and metaphor, but hearing them stated so plainly made them real in a way that both thrilled and terrified her. I love you too, she admitted, the words feeling both monumental and completely natural. But I don't want to be the reason you abandon your family when they need you. What if there was another option? Kieran's thumb traced circles on her palm. What if you came with me? To Colorado? The possibility had never occurred to her. We could marry before leaving, he continued, the words coming faster now. Start fresh somewhere new, away from Jackson's judgment. A place where your words wouldn't be burned but cherished. Marriage. The word resonated through Katherine like a bell. She had never imagined herself as a rancher's wife, had always seen her future tied to her writing, perhaps as a teacher like her father or even a journalist in a larger city. But the thought of building a life with Kieran, of combining their separate paths into one shared journey, filled her with unexpected longing. This is very sudden, she said finally. We should take time to, I know. He smiled ruefully. The practical Katherine James would never rush into such a decision. But the poet in you, what does she say? Katherine looked at him in the fading light. This man who had appeared in her life exactly when she needed him most, who had seen value in her words when others saw only threat. The poet in her knew precisely what to say. She says that some stories write themselves, and we are merely the fortunate ones chosen to live them. Kieran's face broke into a radiant smile. Is that a yes? It's a I need to think about this properly, but my heart is already far ahead of my head. He laughed, pulling her into his arms. I'll take that for now. As twilight deepened around them, they sat beside the hot spring talking of possibilities of Colorado ranches and writing spaces, of children with his eyes and her love of words, of the life they might build together far from Jackson's narrow confines. When Kieran finally kissed her, it felt like the natural conclusion to a sentence that had been forming since they first met. Later, riding back to town under a canopy of stars, Katherine rested her cheek against Kieran's back and thought about beginnings and endings, how the burning of her poetry had seemed like devastation, but had actually cleared ground for something new to grow. Sometimes, she wrote that night, the most beautiful stories arise from the ashes of what we thought we wanted, transforming into something we never dared to imagine but cannot bear to live without. The following week passed in a whirlwind of decisions and preparations. After 2 days of careful consideration, Katherine gave Kieran her answer yes. She would marry him and journey to Colorado, leaving behind the only home she'd ever known for the promise of a life where both their talents could flourish. They planned a simple ceremony for the end of August, just before their departure. Katherine wrote to her only living relative, an aunt in St. Louis, informing her of the marriage but not expecting her to attend. Kieran sent word to his brothers that he would return, with a wife, to help during the eldest's recovery. Not everyone received their news with enthusiasm. Mayor Perkins made a point of telling Katherine that her hasty marriage confirmed everything he believed about her character. Mrs. Thornton spread rumors that there must be a scandalous reason for such a rushed wedding. Even Mrs. Peterson, who had grown fond of Kieran, expressed concern about Katherine moving so far from familiar surroundings. People will always find reasons to disapprove, Kieran reassured her one evening as they sat on her porch. What matters is that we know the truth of our own hearts. I just wish my father could have known you, Katherine said wistfully. He would have appreciated your mind, and he would have been thrilled to know I'd found someone who values my writing. From everything you've told me about him, I believe he would be proud of you for following your own path. Kieran squeezed her hand. And perhaps he does know, in some way. 3 days before their wedding, Katherine received an unexpected visitor. Gladys Morris, the cook from Silver Creek Ranch, appeared at her door with a small, weathered piece of paper in her hand. I heard you're marrying our Kieran and heading to Colorado, the older woman said without preamble. I wanted to give you this before you left. She handed Katherine the paper, a poem Katherine had written over a year ago about finding beauty in unlikely places. The edges were worn smooth from handling, the creases deep from being folded and unfolded countless times. Your words got me through some dark nights after my husband passed, Gladys explained. Made me see that life goes on, that there's still beauty to be found even after loss. Katherine felt tears prick her eyes. I had no idea my poetry meant so much to you. Not just me. There's plenty in town who treasured your words, even if they were too cowardly to speak up when the mayor and his cronies decided to make an example of you. Gladys's weathered face softened. Kieran's a good man. One of the few who wasn't afraid to stand by what he believes in, just like you. Thank you, Katherine said, genuinely moved. Would you come to our wedding? It will be small, just at the church with Reverend Thomas officiating, but I'd be honored to have you there. Wouldn't miss it, Gladys promised. And I'll bring a few others who remember your father fondly and wish you well, regardless of what the town busybodies say. After Gladys left, Katherine carefully placed the returned poem in her journal, next to the continuing story of her and Kieran. The fact that her words had provided comfort to someone during grief made the public burning sting a little less. Perhaps not all was lost after all. The day before the wedding, Kieran took Katherine to the meadow where they'd had their first proper outing, now transformed by late summer colors, goldenrod replacing the early wildflowers. The grasses turned a rich amber under the August sun. They stood together looking out over the valley, the familiar view now tinged with the bittersweetness of imminent departure. Are you having any second thoughts? Kieran asked, his arm around her waist. About marrying you? Not one. She leaned into him. About leaving Jackson? Perhaps a few. Not because I'll miss the small-mindedness, but because it's been my home for all my life. My parents are buried here. We can visit, he promised. And maybe someday, when memories have softened, you might even publish those poems that were burned. Let Jackson see what they tried to destroy. Katherine smiled at the thought. Perhaps. But first, I need to finish our story. Our story's just beginning, he reminded her. The written version, I mean. I want to complete it before we leave a record of these months, from the burning to our departure. A testament to how something beautiful arose from that public humiliation. Will you let me read it? The complete version? She nodded. On our wedding night. It seems fitting that you should finally see the whole story as we start our new chapter. The next morning dawned clear and bright, as if Wyoming itself had decided to offer a perfect day as a parting gift. Katherine dressed with care in a new blue dress she'd finished sewing just days before, not traditional white, but the color of lupins from their meadow and the Wyoming sky that had witnessed their love's beginning. Mrs. Peterson helped arrange her hair, weaving small wildflowers into the auburn waves. You look beautiful, dear, the older woman said, blinking back tears. Your father would be so proud. Do you think he would approve? Of Kieran? Of me leaving? Mrs. Peterson considered this. Thomas James wanted one thing above all for you: happiness. Not the shallow kind that comes from following rules and meeting expectations, but the deep joy that comes from living authentically. She patted Katherine's cheek. He would absolutely approve of a man who encourages your writing instead of fearing it. The church was surprisingly full when Katherine arrived. Besides Gladys, several other ranch hands had come, along with families from outlying farms who had known her father, a few shopkeepers who had quietly supported her, and even Sheriff Mills, who nodded respectfully as she passed. And then there was Kieran, standing at the altar looking more handsome than she had ever seen him in a new suit, his usually windswept hair tamed for the occasion, his eyes finding hers the moment she appeared in the doorway. As Katherine walked down the aisle alone, she felt an overwhelming sense of rightness that this unexpected turn in her life story was exactly as it should be. The narrative she had been writing in her journal wasn't fiction after all, but the truest thing she had ever created. Reverend Thomas, who had been a friend of her father's and had always encouraged her writing, performed the ceremony with genuine warmth. When the time came for vows, Kieran surprised her by reciting words he had clearly written himself. Katherine, when I first saw you standing amidst the ashes of your work, I recognized a spirit that would not be diminished by others' fear. I promised to honor your voice, to cherish your words, to stand beside you through whatever chapters life writes for us. My heart, my hands, my future, all are yours, today and every day that follows. Katherine, moved beyond prepared responses, spoke from her heart. Kieran, you appeared when I thought my story had reached its darkest page, and you offered not pity but partnership, not rescue but respect. I promised to love you honestly, to write our days with care, to face whatever comes with the courage you've helped me rediscover. Whatever we create together, be it ranch, family, or legacy, will be our greatest work. When Reverend Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, the small church erupted in heartfelt applause. Even those who had come out of mere curiosity seemed touched by the genuine love evident between the unlikely pair. The celebration afterward was modest but joyful, held in the churchyard with food contributed by well-wishers. Katherine found herself surrounded by people expressing genuine sadness at her departure and good wishes for her future, a stark contrast to the public condemnation she had faced just months earlier. "Seems you had more friends than you realized," Kieran observed as they greeted guests together. "Perhaps," she agreed. "Or perhaps they simply needed to see that standing up for oneself doesn't lead to disaster." As the afternoon waned, they bid farewell to their guests and made their way to the small hotel where they would spend their wedding night before departing the following morning. Their bags were already packed, the wagon they would take to the nearest train station loaded with Katherine's books, Kieran's few possessions, and the beginnings of their shared life. In their hotel room, with the door closed against the world, Kieran took Katherine in his arms, looking at her with wonder. "Mrs. Keller," he said softly, testing the sound of it. "It has a certain ring to it," she agreed, her arms encircling his neck. "Almost as good as Katherine James, published poetess," he teased. "Which you will be, one day soon." "Perhaps," she smiled. "But first, I believe I promised you something." She retrieved her leather journal from her bag and handed it to him. "Our story, from the burning to today. It's not finished. Of course, we have many pages yet to write, but this chapter is complete." Kieran accepted the journal reverently, sitting on the edge of the bed to read while Katherine moved around the room, unpinning her hair and removing the flowers Mrs. Peterson had woven into it. She watched him as he read, his expressions shifting from amusement to tenderness, occasionally looking up to meet her eyes when he encountered a particularly intimate passage. When he finished, he closed the journal carefully and extended his hand to her. As she took it, he pulled her gently to sit beside him. "You've made me sound far more poetic than I am," he said, voice husky with emotion. "I wrote exactly what I saw," she countered. "If there's poetry in it, that's because you brought poetry back into my life." "Katherine," he traced the line of her jaw with gentle fingers. "Promise me something. Anything. Promise you'll never stop writing. No matter what happens in Colorado, no matter what challenges we face. Your words are too important to be silenced again." She turned her face to kiss his palm. "I promise. And I'll hold you to your promise as well, to keep sketching, to keep creating beauty alongside me. Always." He leaned forward to kiss her, sealing their vows with a tenderness that quickly deepened into passion. Later, as moonlight spilled through the window, Katherine lay in her husband's arms, thinking about endings and beginnings, about words burned and words reborn. Tomorrow they would leave Jackson behind, traveling to a place she had never seen to build a life with a man who had entered her world just when she needed him most. She thought about the journal resting on the bedside table, the story it contained, not improper after all, but deeply proper in the truest sense. Authentic, honest, uncompromising in its truth. A love story written not in defiance but in affirmation, a testament to the power of words to transform lives. "What are you thinking about?" Kieran murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "I'm thinking that some stories write themselves," she replied, echoing her words from the hot spring. "And we are merely the fortunate ones chosen to live them." "And our story?" he asked, pulling her closer. "What happens in the next chapter?" Katherine smiled in the darkness. "We'll have to write it together to find out." The journey to Colorado took 4 days, first by wagon to the nearest train station, then by rail through territories Katherine had only read about. She filled a new journal with observations of the changing landscape, the people they encountered, and her own shifting emotions as they traveled farther from everything familiar. Kieran watched her write with evident pleasure. "You see things others miss," he commented one afternoon as their train crossed Nebraska. "Details that most people overlook. That's what poetry is," she explained. "Finding meaning in the overlooked moments." When they finally arrived at the small Colorado town nearest to the Keller ranch, Kieran's middle brother, Lucas, was waiting with a wagon. He greeted Kieran with a backslapping hug and Katherine with genuine warmth. "About time my little brother found himself a woman with sense," he declared after being introduced. "Ma's been beside herself with excitement since your letter arrived." The ranch itself lay 15 miles outside town, nestled in a valley with mountains rising beyond. As they approached, Katherine took in the sprawling main house, the well-maintained outbuildings, the healthy cattle grazing on summer-rich pastures. This was clearly a prosperous operation, lovingly maintained through generations. "It's beautiful," she said to Kieran, who had been watching her reaction anxiously. "It's home," he replied simply. Or it was. Now home is wherever you are. The welcome at the ranch house was overwhelming. Kieran's mother, Elizabeth, embraced Katherine as if she were a long-lost daughter rather than a new daughter-in-law. His eldest brother, James, pale from his illness but clearly on the mend, shook her hand warmly from his chair by the fire. Various ranch hands and their families came by throughout the evening to welcome Kieran back and meet his bride. "We've heard all about your writing," Elizabeth said as she showed Katherine to the room she would share with Kieran. "Kieran wrote that you're quite the poetess." "I enjoy expressing myself through words," Katherine replied cautiously, unsure how this might be received in her new home. Elizabeth's smile was knowing. "My dear, I taught school for 10 years before I married Charles Keller. I've always believed that an educated woman makes the strongest partner in life." She patted Katherine's hand. "There's a small room off the library that Charles used for his accounts. It has a lovely view of the mountains. I thought you might like it for your writing." Tears pricked Katherine's eyes at this unexpected understanding. "That's incredibly thoughtful, Mrs. Keller. Elizabeth, please. We're family now." She looked at Katherine with genuine affection. Kieran was always different from his brothers, more thoughtful, more attuned to beauty. "When he left after the argument with James, I worried he might never find his place. But seeing him with you, I think he finally has." That night, lying beside Kieran in the bedroom that had been his since childhood, Katherine felt a weight lifting that she hadn't fully acknowledged, the fear that she might not belong in this new life, that she would have to suppress essential parts of herself to fit in. "Your family is wonderful," she whispered in the darkness. "They see in you what I see," he replied, pulling her close. "A remarkable woman who will make this ranch richer by her presence." The following weeks were a period of adjustment as Katherine learned the rhythms of ranch life while carving out time for her writing. True to Elizabeth's word, the small study became Katherine's sanctuary, where she worked each morning on polishing the manuscript of their love story while beginning new poems inspired by her Colorado surroundings. Kieran and Lucas managed the daily ranch operations, with James gradually resuming lighter duties as his strength returned. Katherine found herself welcomed into the running of the household, Elizabeth grateful for another woman's company after years of being outnumbered by men. By October, with the aspen trees turned brilliant gold against the evergreens, Katherine had completed her final draft of From Ashes, the title she'd chosen for the story of their meeting and courtship. When she showed it to Kieran, his response was immediate and emphatic. "This needs to be published." Katherine shook her head. "It's just for us, a record of our beginning." "Katherine, this is beautiful writing, honest, powerful, universal in its themes of rejection and redemption. Others would find meaning in it, just as they would have in your poetry." "Perhaps, but who would publish it?" "It's not exactly a conventional romance. We could start with the Denver Literary Review, or even the Colorado Springs Gazette. They publish local writers." His enthusiasm was contagious. "At least consider it." After some persuasion, Katherine agreed to submit excerpts to the Denver Literary Review. To her astonishment, not only did they accept her submission, but the editor wrote a personal note expressing interest in seeing more of her work, including any poetry she might have recreated from memory. This initial success gave her the confidence to begin reconstructing some of the poems that had been burned in Jackson. Working from fragments she recalled and themes that had always preoccupied her, she created a new collection that honored her earlier work while reflecting her growth since then. As winter settled over the ranch, bringing short days and long evenings around the fire, Katherine and Kieran established traditions that blended their separate talents. She would read aloud from her latest writings while he sketched, sometimes illustrating the very scenes she described. Elizabeth often joined them, her knitting needles clicking softly as she listened, occasionally offering insights from her own reading and teaching days. James, fully recovered by Christmas, pulled Kieran aside during the holiday celebrations. Katherine observed them from across the room, noting the earnest conversation and the eventual handshake that suggested reconciliation. Later, Kieran confirmed her suspicions. He apologized for being so rigid about the ranch operations, Kieran explained as they prepared for bed. Said my leaving made him realize that preserving family was more important than preserving tradition exactly as father would have done it. And you? Did you apologize too? Kieran smiled ruefully. For being equally stubborn, yes. But not for leaving. He pulled her into his arms. If I hadn't, I would never have met you, never known what it means to truly be understood. As winter gave way to spring, Katherine received exciting news. The Denver Literary Review wanted to publish a collection of her poetry, along with a shortened version of From Ashes, as a special feature. The editor, a progressive woman named Eleanor Harrington, wrote that Katherine's voice was precisely what the modern Western literary landscape needs: authentic, unflinching, and deeply connected to both land and humanity. Publication day in April 1884 brought a flurry of activity to the ranch, with copies of the review delivered by special messenger. Seeing her words in print, Katherine felt a vindication so profound it brought tears to her eyes, not because she needed external validation, but because it represented the closing of a circle that had begun with public humiliation and ended with public recognition. To Katherine Keller, Kieran toasted at dinner that night. The entire family raised glasses around the table, whose improper poetry will now properly inspire readers across Colorado territory and beyond. And to the cowboy who asked me to write our love story instead, she returned, her eyes holding his across the table, without whom these words might have remained ashes. The success of her published work brought unexpected opportunities. By summer, Katherine had been invited to speak at the Denver Women's Literary Society and had received inquiries from publishers as far away as Chicago about a full-length book. Kieran encouraged each new possibility while ensuring she knew that her writing would remain valued whether it brought external success or not. Their first anniversary found them back in the mountain meadow where Kieran had proposed, now with a picnic basket packed by Elizabeth and a bottle of wine from James's carefully maintained cellar. As they spread their blanket among the summer wildflowers, Katherine presented Kieran with her anniversary gift, a leather-bound, handwritten copy of From Ashes, complete with his own sketches that she had carefully collected and integrated into the text. "This is extraordinary," he said, turning the pages with reverent hands. "Our story, in both our languages." "I thought we might keep it for our children someday," she replied, "so they'll know how their parents found each other." Kieran looked up, his expression softening. "Speaking of children," Katherine smiled, taking his hand and placing it gently over her stomach. "I was wondering when you'd notice the changes." His eyes widened. "Are you certain?" Elizabeth suspected first. She's had experience with such things, after all. But yes, the doctor confirmed it yesterday. By winter, there will be another Keller at the ranch. Kieran gathered her into a careful embrace, his joy evident in the brightness of his eyes. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Our next chapter." In December 1884, during a gentle snowfall that blanketed the Colorado mountains, Katherine gave birth to a son they named Thomas, after her father. As she held him in the quiet of their bedroom, Kieran sitting beside them with wonder written across his features, she thought about the strange, winding path that had led to this moment. "What are you thinking?" Kieran asked softly, stroking their son's tiny hand. "I'm thinking about fire," she replied. "How it destroys, but also clears ground for new growth." She looked from their child to her husband. "If they hadn't burned my poetry that day, you might never have approached me." "I like to think I would have found the courage eventually," he said with a smile. "But perhaps not in time. Either way, what they meant to diminish me ultimately led to this to us." She touched Thomas's downy head. To him, as the years passed, the Keller Ranch prospered under the shared management of the brothers, each bringing different strengths to the operation. Katherine's literary reputation grew steadily, her poetry and prose appearing in publications throughout the West and eventually reaching Eastern audiences. Their family expanded with the birth of a daughter, Elizabeth Rose, in 1887, and another son, William, in 1890. Katherine established a small library on the ranch, open to all the workers' families and neighboring homesteaders. She began teaching writing classes there on weekends, encouraging other women to find their voices just as she had found hers. Kieran's sketches, meanwhile, had evolved into respected Western art, with several pieces displayed in Denver galleries. On their 10th anniversary in 1893, they returned to Jackson, Wyoming, for the first time since their departure. The town had grown considerably, with new businesses and homes expanding its boundaries. As they walked the familiar streets, now with 3 children in tow, they encountered both changed and unchanged attitudes. Mayor Perkins had died 2 years earlier, replaced by a younger, more progressive man who welcomed Katherine warmly and spoke admiringly of her literary accomplishments. Mrs. Peterson, now quite elderly but still sharp-minded, wept with joy at meeting the Keller children and seeing Katherine's happiness. Most meaningful was their visit to the town's new library, where the librarian proudly showed Katherine a shelf containing her published works, 2 volumes of poetry, a collection of essays about Western womanhood, and the expanded book version of From Ashes that had become her most celebrated work. "We have a reading group that meets monthly to discuss your writing," the young librarian explained. "Many of our members remember when you lived here and say they always knew you were destined for greater things." Katherine exchanged an amused glance with Kieran. "History often rewrites itself to align with the present," she observed later as they walked back to their hotel. "Does it matter?" he asked. "You've proven yourself beyond anyone's judgment." Your words outlasted their flames. On their final evening in Jackson, they walked to the town square where her poetry had been burned a decade earlier. The space had been beautified with flower beds and benches, no trace remaining of that public humiliation. "Should we tell the children what happened here?" Kieran asked quietly as Thomas and Elizabeth chased each other around the square, baby William asleep in his arms. Katherine considered this, watching her free-spirited children play in the place where her own freedom had once been challenged. Yes, when they're old enough to understand. They should know that standing firm in your truth has costs, but also rewards beyond measure. She took his free hand, this man who had appeared in her life at exactly the right moment, whose love had helped transform loss into creation. And they should know that sometimes, when one story ends in ashes, another more beautiful one is waiting to be written. As the Wyoming sunset painted the sky in colors no poet could fully capture, Katherine James Keller stood surrounded by the family that had grown from an unexpected proposition on a day of burning. The improper poetry that had scandalized Jackson had led to a life richer in love and meaning than she could have imagined, a true story more powerful than any she might have created through fiction alone. And in the end, wasn't that the most proper outcome of all?